Hi everyone, it's Miss Miller and welcome to our classroom channel. Today we're going to talk about the repetition of rhetoric, and it's going to be a case study in Macbeth. However, it does not matter what you are currently reading. We want to take a look at how repetition works in a piece of literature, or particularly in poetry. It works very well, but Shakespeare uses repetition and you probably have already recognized it. I'm sure you're familiar with the experience, and we all have, where our parents call our names at least like 3 or 4 times. They repeat our names. Billy, Billy, get over here. Billy, come downstairs. And it has like this effect that you don't even recognize. It's like, oh, it's like torture, right? Mental torture. But we're going to look at how repetition works in literature. So before we get started, I want to tell you 3 primary reasons why an author might sort of employ this idea of repetition. And we're going to also find out that repetition shows up in different forms. So one reason that an author might use repetition is it could be for emphasis. Right? We might want to emphasize a particular idea, and so it's being repeated over. And you have to be careful not to overuse a word or concept or idea in a piece of literary work because it can be overdone. Another reason that someone might use or employ repetition in a piece of literary work, it could be to be persuasive, to encourage, to motivate, to inspire people. So, and a lot of politics and campaigns, you'll see some of the same repetition or rhetorical repetition used over and over, like yes we can, or make America great again, or whatever, and they use it over and over again. So that has a rhetorical effect. And that leads us to our next one, which is it helps us to retain, recall, and remember something. If it's being repeated over again, then when you go back, you are going to keep that in your brain and in your subconscious. So let's talk about the different forms in which repetition shows up in literature. And I think it's important when you see repetition, you're like, wait a minute, didn't they say that already? Wait a minute, isn't this something that was introduced in just the line prior? We're going to have a name for it. And some of these names you may never have heard of, but at least we're going to have a specific term to use when referring to the repetition used in Shakespeare or even in poetry. So there's a lot happening here, but the first one is going to be called anadiplosis. Anadiplosis. And you can see over here where we have this singer who says it repeats the last word or words of a sentence, phrase, or clause at or near the beginning of the next. So if you can see this expression up in the corner here, it says better walk, that walk, baby. So baby is the key word, right? Because it's the last word. And then it starts the next few lines with baby, I'm sorry, baby, I'm sorry. So the key word here for anadiplosis is baby. Then we can look at conduplicatio, which is it takes an important word from anywhere in the sentence. So not necessarily the last word, but anywhere in the sentence, or it could be the clause or the phrase, and repeating it again at the beginning of the next sentence or clause or phrase. So if we look here at the bottom, we'll see where battle in line, I can't see, I have an arrow there. So battle is where it says battle wounds, but battle is the key word here. It's an important word in this term, in this song. And then we see the word battle repeated as the first line in the next line of the lyrics. Okay, so we have anadiplosis, and we have conduplicatio. All right, and so here's what it looks like if we do our case study in Macbeth. We have, it will have blood. Now this is the end of a phrase or a clause, right? And then we see it again. They say blood will have blood. So that's another example, and we can think about, you can think about what rhetorical effects this has on your understanding of the text. We're going to look at another one, which is Macbeth, and he says, and this is in Act 3, Scene 4, he says, I am bent to know by the worst means the worst, right? And so, again, we see the word worst, and I would say it's towards the end, or you could even say it's toward the beginning, and then we see it again towards the beginning of the next line, or not even the next line, the next phrase or clause, the worst. And then we have the doctor, which shows up in Act 5, Scene 1, towards the end of Macbeth. And again, remember, it doesn't matter what you are reading in class. If you're been asked to observe this video, then it's for you to look at the repetition. And ideally, if you can recognize the repetition in Shakespeare, you really can recognize it in just about anything. So unnatural deeds, right? We see it. Do breed unnatural troubles. So there you have it for those two examples. Now let's take a look at perhaps more popular ones that you will come across in literature, which one is anaphora, right? And that means that it repeats the first word or phrase in successive sentences. So you'll see the first phrase and it's repeated over. So why don't you pull me close? Why don't you come on over, right? So why don't you is the example of anaphora. And then we have epistrophe, and that's just the opposite of anaphora, which is it repeats the words or phrases at the end of successive sentences. So if you look at Beyonce, right, and she has her song, and it says, put a ring on it. It's at the end. Then again at the end, in the next line, it says, put a ring on it. And then you skip another line, and you've got the next line, and it's the exact same thing, put a ring on it. Okay, I think we get the point. You want to get married, right? So those are the two examples for the repetition of a word or words in the consecutive sentences, clauses, or phrases. And then we have symplosi, which is a combination of anaphora and epistrophe. So if you were to add anaphora and epistrophe together, then you would have symplosi. You think about I don't know. Anyways, this one is a little bit more challenging to find in music, but you definitely see it in rhetoric, like in politics and American rhetoric. So here's the example, and this is from A Few Good Men. And we have Jack Nicholson, who's in the hot seat, and he says, you don't want to know the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. So there's a little bit of a change, not that much. So, right, so we see it on the beginning, you, and then it says me on that wall. And then again, the next phrase or line or even the next sentence, you space need me on that wall. And so when you juxtapose those, you see want and need. Those are different in the text. Let's hear what it sounds like, so you can hear perhaps the effect that it might have.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth! Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's gonna do it? You? You, Lieutenant Weinberg? I have a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom. You weep for Santiago and you curse the Marines. You have that luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what I know, that Santiago's death, while tragic, probably saved lives, and my existence, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, saves lives. You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. We use words like...
Okay, so I think you see the point there, okay? But that's what it sounds like. And so it does have definitely a rhetorical effect. So if we look at Macbeth, we see this continuing, right? Thrice to thine and thrice to mine and thrice again to make up 9, right? 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 9. So that's the rhetorical effect there. To help us to perhaps make a culmination of all of the threes. And then we have the first, which says, all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, right? And then the Thane of Glamis, and then the second, which is, all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. And then the third, which is, all hail Macbeth, that thou shalt be king hereafter. So again, we take a look at how this works. We see anaphora at work here in the text, and we also see epistrophe because it's at the end. And I would even, say, look at the end of how it works with the Thane of Glamis and the Thane of Cawdor, and you have to look at the distinction there as well. And then we look at, in Act 4, Scene 3, we see Malcolm, who says, what I believe, I'll wail. what know, believe, and what I can redress, as I shall find the same, find the time to friend, I will, right? So what I believe, and then here we go again, what, and then what I, and then believe. You can see it's sort of all over in there, but it's repeated. And so that ends our, I'm going to zoom in. So that ends our discussion in what repetition looks like in literature. It comes in many forms. I hope that was helpful.